Teamwork isn't just nice to have in business, it's the undisputed competitive advantage. When your team members work as a unified force, your whole operation benefits through higher productivity, thriving creativity, and unstoppable momentum. Welcome to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast, where we share with you strategies and tactics to help you develop game-changing teams so that you and your business can make a real difference in the world.
Welcome. So today's edition of Impactful Teamwork, I want to go back to our roots and really look a little bit at nature and what we can learn from nature to become better leaders. And this has been inspired by a number of events that have happened over the weekend. First of all, I found a lamb. It was on the driveway. We've got sheep in fields either side of the driveway. And I went to rescue this sheep and I went to put it back in the field and then realized there were no other lambs in that field. And subsequently, we spoke to the farmer and it was a rogue pregnancy. There wasn't meant to be a lamb in that field. He told us and given us permission to adopt it. So I now have a lamb that I've named Charlie that we're looking after. And then I've just seen in the field when I've been out with the horses today that we've got some, I was going to call them ducklings, but they're not. They're the offspring of Canadian geese. So whatever you call them, geeslings, I don't know what it is. But a lot going on in nature at the moment. So clearly, I think nature is such a great example for us of what's going on. And so today I really wanted to talk about the topic about regeneration and what nature already knows about leadership. And I want to signpost you to start with to a video. It's one of my favorite on YouTube. And it is all about the regeneration of Yellowstone National Park. Because in nature, or in ecology, should I say, there is a phenomenon that's called trophic cascade. And what happened at Yellowstone National Park in the early 20th century was that the walls were removed. And as a result of taking the wolves out of that ecosystem, the deer population absolutely exploded. But that caused problems because they overgrazed the riverbanks. And as a result of some of that soil erosion, the rivers changed course. And some of the songbirds disappeared. And just by changing one dynamic, the entire ecosystem began to collapse. Not because of a predator, but because one relationship had been severed. And what's really ironic is when the wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone Park in 1995, the rivers literally changed course again. The deer population began to get cold because obviously the wolves were feeding off of the deer. And as a result of there being less deer, the trees started to flourish more, the beavers returned, the fish returned. So one relationship restored, regenerated everything. And I wanted to share this story with you today because I think most organizations today are doing exactly this. They're removing the relationships that hold the system together and wondering why everything is collapsing. So today on Impactful Teamwork, I want to talk about what nature has always understood about regenerative leadership, why it matters more than ever, and the uncomfortable truth about the behaviours that are quietly sabotaging it, probably including some of your own. So many of you have heard me speak about this a lot of times before, but the dominant model of leadership in most organizations today is built on what I call extraction. Workers are often seen as costs, departments are siloed, success is measured at the expense of something. And unfortunately, that's usually our team members or the culture or maybe the long-term sustainability of the business. And we rarely name those costs directly, but they show up. They show up in the fact that the way that a lot of business is being run today is what we call the me economy. It's very ego-led. It's built on the assumption that the leader at the top knows best, decides everything, and holds it all together. And believe me, I understand that model. I lived inside it for many years in my corporate career at Arthur Andersen and Deloitte. And I think many leaders in that situation, they feel like they're in control. And it's not really, it's just that people are being very complicit and following their guidance. And we know if you're a team member, that's not a great place to be. And we only have to look at the data to support this, because the data is brutal. 86% of business failures are caused by silo mentality and poor collaboration. Think about that, 86%, that's a phenomenal amount. Caused by their silo mentality and poor collaboration because there are no relationships between people in different teams. Nobody is communicating and nobody is aligned behind the shared vision of where the business is going. Otherwise, they would be communicating and collaborating together. And in fact, this is substantiated by the fact that only 14% of teams operate with genuine cross-functional unity. And a staggering 83% of team members report change fatigue. So this is the problem. We're running a 21st century business on an industrial age operating system. The command and control model made sense when the tasks were predictable and the people were interchangeable. But none of that is true now. And one of the challenges that we're finding more and more is CEOs who are becoming the ceiling of their own business. And it's not because they're not talented. It's because the model that they're using relies on all the thinking happening at the top of the organization. And it's actually training everybody beneath them to comply rather than contribute. So what does this mean? It means that over time, accountability sits with just one person. Decisions pile up, the team waits, the leader burns out. And then no reinvention is actually possible in the business because the leader is no longer operating at full capacity. And it's really understandable why this has happened. In fact, I think that this is one of the biggest culprits for this happening, and this is our mobile phone. Because leaders today are more available than ever. If you are a team member and you have a question about something, it's way too easy to just send an email, send a voice message, send a WhatsApp, send a Teams message to somebody, your boss usually, your line manager, asking them the answer, rather than actually having to work it out yourself. And I think this is why what we're seeing is decisions being escalated up the organization and team members taking less and less accountability. And this is becoming a real problem. And in fact, is one of the topics that I was speaking to one of my clients about this week was how do we improve accountability throughout the organization? So what is the alternative then? I'd like to signpost you to nature because nature's sorted this out for 4 billion years. It's been running a regenerative system the whole time. And it's just that we stopped paying attention to what's happening in nature and stopped using nature as a textbook for ways that we could do things differently. So let me just share with you a couple of examples of this. And first of all, I want to look at the lichen. And lichen, that's that crusty stuff that you see on old stone walls. And what this is really fascinating, it's actually two entirely different organisms, fungi and algae. But they're so intertwined and mutually dependent that scientists initially assumed that they were one creature. And what's interesting here is that the fungi provides the structure and protection, and the algae provides food through photosynthesis. And neither can thrive alone. And together they colonize environments that nothing else can survive in. So things like Arctic rock or desert stone. So that's an example of true interdependence. And that's really what a regenerative relationship would look like. So imagine this. Imagine if your finance team and your sales team operated like lichen. Imagine if your leadership team genuinely co-owned outcomes rather than defended their own territories. what a difference that would make to business, what a difference that will make to the culture and the environment we worked in. Now, as many of you, I've spent a lot of my time studying wild horses and actually being around my own horses. And what's really fascinating is when we look at horse herds is that they've been navigating uncertainty and sustaining high performance for millions of years. And in a horse herd, we don't have hierarchy and control. Instead, we have shared leadership, collective awareness, and absolute alignment behind a shared direction. And when people come and partner with the horses on our leadership days, one of the things that we share with them is the diamond model of leadership. And in the diamond model of leadership, the lead mare sets the direction. She's actually at the front. The stallion is at the bottom of the diamond, leading from behind. He's protecting and sweeping and training the next generation. And then we've got the lieutenants or the sentinels on either side of the diamond. And they're out there sensing the danger first and stepping forward when needed. And what's interesting within the horse herd is that every single herd member knows their role and is accountable for it. Yes, accountable. And those who don't fulfill their role are sent out of the herd, because actually the most dangerous place for a horse to be is outside the herd, because it's not safe. It's really tricky to protect yourself if you're a prey animal and you're not in the group. But what's really interesting for me is that one of the reasons I think that we've had this lack of accountability, or this growing lack of accountability within organizations, is that team members don't like to hold each other to account. We're afraid of upsetting somebody or saying something that might be deemed inappropriate or wrong. But actually, we see exactly the opposite in the horse herd. In the horse herd, if a herd member is not accountable, they're not paying attention, they don't see the danger around them, the lead mare comes up and bites them on the bum. But what's different in the horse herd is the horse knows it's been reprimanded for not paying attention, not being accountable. But it doesn't walk around for the next 2 days, 3 days, weeks, months, being mad at somebody for showing them that they hadn't been accountable. They, as we say, they go back to grazing. And so I just wonder what would happen in terms of relationships in the workplace if we could have more candid conversations, take on board, get the feedback, and then go back to grazing. Because the thing is, in the horse herd, the leadership is never a given. It's constantly re-earned. And the lead mare keeps her position because she keeps performing. And the moment she doesn't, she's challenged. And I often wonder what happens in business if we held our leaders to the same standards if they weren't performing. So let me just summarize this. I think in essence, what we have here are 3 regenerative principles that nature demonstrates. And the first of those is that we've got interdependence over independence. So nothing in nature thrives in isolation. The ecosystem's health is the unit of measurement. The second principle is rhythm over relentlessness. Nature has seasons, rest, it becomes dormant, it renews. There's no such thing as a permanent sprint mode in a healthy system. And yet in business, aren't we always on a permanent sprint? And the third regenerative principle is relationships as infrastructure. It's the quality of the connections within the system that determines how the system functions under pressure. So what does regenerative leadership actually look like in practice? I think first thing I'd say is a regenerative organization is not a soft organization. It's actually a much more intelligent one. It's orientated towards creating conditions in which both the business and the people can continue to grow and adapt over time. And I think there's 3 things that regenerative leaders do differently. And the first is that they actually treat these relationships as infrastructure, not sentiment. And this just reminds me of a client I had, the CEO of a professional service firm. He was brilliant, he was capable, he was driven, but he was completely unaware that his team had stopped bringing him the real thinking because of the cost of being wronged in his presence was so high. And as a result of that, the relationships had quietly frayed. Nobody had named it, but the organization was leaking talent and ideas, and he genuinely didn't know why. So this is why when we talk about it, relationships aren't nice to have. They are imperative, because when relationships break down, the system loses knowledge, continuity, and trust. And those aren't things that are easily replaced. The second thing that regenerative leaders do differently is they practice what I call teamship. And this is more than just teamwork, because teamwork is something people do. Teamship is something a group becomes. It's a shift from individuals cooperating on tasks to a team that generally co-owns outcomes, where leadership is shared, where every person understands their role and steps into it fully. The horse herd doesn't do a teamwork. It practices and epitomizes teamship. And the third thing regenerative leaders do differently is that they lead with attention, not just intention. Because the thing is, most leaders are so deep in their own heads, they're managing their own stress, anxiety, what's going to happen in the next meeting, they're thinking about their quarterly targets. They're actually so in their head, they're not actually reading what is happening in the room right here and now. They're definitely not present in their body. They might be physically there, but they're not present to what's going on. And the problem is a leader who cannot read a room cannot sense the energy of the room, and they cannot notice what is not being said. And as a result of that, leader is making decisions each and every day with an incomplete data set, just because they haven't spent the time to slow down, connect with people, really find what is going on so that they have the best information to make a decision. And some of you will know my own story about going to live in the African bush because I realized I was going through life not being present, not paying attention. And when I discovered that, it was really quite distressing. I was like, I was going through life on a tick box exercise, but never really remembering or experiencing and or embodying what was going on. So that was when I made a radical decision to go and train to be a safari guide. And I lived out in the African bush for 4 months because I knew that if I wanted to be present and pay attention, there's nowhere better to do it in the African bush, because if I didn't pay attention and be present out there, there was the danger I was going to be some lion's dinner. So the African bush really taught me how to read everything, every sound, every shift in the air. And it's really rewired how I move through the world. And it's now the foundation of everything I teach, because we all need to be way more present to see and read and feel the energy of what's happening around me. The problem is most leaders are actually sabotaging their own success, because the leaders who need regenerative leadership the most are the ones most likely to be unconsciously resisting it. And here are 3 sabotage patterns that I've been noticing recently. Sabotage pattern 1. It's the extraction mindset, but it's disguised as high standards. So what do I mean by that? We see this all the time when a business lays off hundreds of people. We need to cost cut. And yet at the same time, the CEO's pay and remuneration is increased. And this creates an interdependence that's no longer in balance. But it doesn't have to be as dramatic as that. It could just be a leader who treats every team member as a cost rather than a relationship. People not spending time talking to each other so that people understand a business decision that's been made. And recently in some of the freelance work I've done, this has exactly happened to me. It was decided that a restaurant that I've been running for 5 years at one of the race courses, that they wanted to have a change and that somebody else would run it. And I totally get that. It's good to change things up, to reinvent things all the time. I'm a massive proponent of reinvention. But what really upset me about it was that nobody had the courtesy to have a conversation with me about it and say, hey, Julia, this is what we've decided. This is what's going to happen. So that I knew. And right now, I am feeling quite wounded. I'm feeling like that company has no respect for me. And it's just treated me right there as a team member that's a cost rather than a person to have a relationship with. The second sabotaging pattern is business as a substitute for being present. Now, we see this a lot, don't we? Leaders and managers running around crazy busy. But actually, often I think that busyness is an evasion tactic. If we stay busy, then we don't have to deal with things like having a difficult conversation because we just don't have time for that, right? And recently I was talking with a client and I asked them, when did they last sit down with their team and do nothing except listen? And he looked at me like I was mad. When does he have time to sit down with his team? But actually, this is one of the key principles of regenerative systems. They require rest, reflection, and genuine attention. We've often talked about the ebbs and flow of business and how in nature, everything is cyclical. There's an up and a down. And it's the same with your own energy levels as well. This relentless pace is not ambition. In fact, it's often fear dressed up as productivity. Just think about that for a moment. Sabotage lesson number 3 is confusing compliance with commitment. As I said earlier on, I think many of us have inadvertently trained our teams to comply, not to think. And if people only comply, we can't expect them to take responsibility because responsibility is not doing what we're told. Responsibility is about doing what is right. And that only happens in cultures built on trust, not fear. And in my futures model, we have something that we call the red zone, and that's the toxic culture zone. And it's built and predicated on one myth, that I, the leader, need to take responsibility for everything because my team can't be trusted. And that myth is self-fulfilling. The moment you stop trusting people, they stop being trustworthy, and you get exactly the culture that you're expecting. That I can't trust my team, they're not going to do things. So I'd just like you to think about this for a minute and what can you do today and what's possible if you do. The future we're creating is a reflection of the relationships we choose to honor today. And that's not a philosophical statement, that's actually a business strategy. So ask yourself honestly, is your organization organized to extract from its people or regenerate with them? Are you the ceiling or are you the catalyst? So if this episode has stirred something in you, if you recognize your team in any of what I've described today, I'd love to talk. Not a sales call, not a conversation, just a chance to explore what regenerative leadership could actually look like inside your Pacific organization with your Pacific team. So you can just go to businesshorsepower.com on the contact us page. You can connect with me and book a call with me directly. I always love to talk to people and brainstorm about what is possible when you start to be able to turbocharge your team through building the relationships and you stop leading like it's 1995 and start leading in the way that nature intended, interconnected, interdependent, and genuinely built for what comes next. So until next time, lead boldly, lead impactfully, and remember, nature has been teaching us this all along. Nature has a blueprint for how that we can lead and run our businesses more effectively if you stop and pause and take the time to pay attention. So have a great week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Impactful Teamwork Podcast. Please stay tuned for future episodes and do subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favourite platform. Recommendations are essential for attracting new listeners. Please follow us on social media at Julia Felton and at Business Horsepower. And if there are any topics you'd like us to cover on future episodes, please do let me know. Remember, you and your team are always making an impact. What impact will you make today?